certified financial planner, Christopher Calandra, is an innovative, comprehensive, informative, and cutting-edge podcast that discusses financial topics ranging from personal finance, economics, politics, and personal growth. Simply Financial will cover intriguing and thought-provoking questions so that the listener can simply increase their financial IQ.
Welcome to episode number 11 of the Simply Financial podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Calandra, and I appreciate you joining me for this episode. I have with me today a special guest, Eric Millhorn, an elder care attorney operating in the Villages. So thank you, Eric.
I appreciate you having me.
So your firm is Millhorn?
Elder Law Planning Group.
Elder Law Planning Group. And so could you tell us a little bit about the firm, what you specialize in, and what you do for clients?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you again for having me. We're it's called an elder law planning firm. A lot of people don't truly understand what elder law would mean. Elder law means that you've covered the three different areas: estate planning, which we'll discuss in a moment, pre-planning, wills, trust, power of attorneys. Then we have what's called long-term care benefit planning, where we apply for VA benefits, nursing home benefits, special needs planning, and guardianship, and then what's called trust and estate administration. We've been so fortunate that we've been in the Villages since 1992. Over that time, we've been able to grow with the Villages. So I think we have over 20 paralegals, but most of the paralegals work in the long-term care planning and trust and estate administration. I truly believe we continue to grow because we do not charge for questions or consultations.
Okay. So somebody wouldn't come to you and your firm for family law, divorce, set up an LLC, set up a business. That's not your specialty.
No, it's not our specialty. We do nothing that's considered adversarial law. So anything where people are fighting, we have to refer them out.
I thought people became an attorney to be adversarial.
Not us.
No?
I'm so happy to say that we do not do any type of adversarial law.
I've never heard that term before. Is that a real thing, or did you make that up?
No, it's a real thing. So family law, criminal law, all these things are adversarial.
And you don't do like personal injury either? Would that be considered adversarial?
No, it is adversarial because you're working with appraisers and different things like that. And there's attorneys who love that. That's not my thing. I want to make sure our clients always leave happy.
So in my 25 years of experience speaking with clients, because there's so many attorneys out there and there's so many areas of law, how should somebody looking to get information, we're going to dig into this in a little bit more, but how does somebody that's looking to get a will and estate planning determine what type of an attorney do they go to? For example, I know lots of times I'll meet with a client and say, oh, you ought to have a will estate plan. It could be simple, could be medium-sized complexity, could be very complex. And they'll be like, well, I'll talk to the person that just did the closing on my house and I'll get it done. Can you just talk a little bit about that in all the areas of law and the specialties, including this new thing I learned, adversarial law?
Absolutely. So the first thing I recommend, if someone's going to a new city and they're looking for an attorney, I always ask, check with their financial advisor or their friend's financial advisor, because there's always going to be one or two attorneys that in the area are known as estate planning specialists. And then what I would ask, if someone's older on in life, and we'll talk again in a moment when you should do estate planning, but if you're older in life, you should be looking for an attorney or a firm that's going to be able to cover three different areas: estate planning, long-term care benefit planning, and then trust and estate administration. What I think our clients are getting with our firm is a support system for their family. So whether we're talking about making a change to a trust, or they have questions about looking at an assisted living facility and how to pay for that care, or their family needs help walking through the administration process, the firm's going to cover them and their family in every situation.
Great. So you mentioned a moment ago something that caught my attention, and that is if you move to a new city. Right now, I'm in the Florida office of Elliott Wealth Management. We have clients in Florida, we have clients in Connecticut, and elsewhere spread through the United States. But in Florida, you have a lot of people that move into this area in retirement. This is one of the preeminent retirement communities in the country. So can you talk about how important it is estate plan-wise relative to the state you're in versus the state you might have lived in earlier in your life?
Absolutely. So there's certain things that are unique to the state. Real estate's an example, family law is an example, and estate planning is an example of state-specific documents. As an example, in Florida has homestead rules. So there's certain documents like the power of attorney that must be updated to include the homestead language. Also, Florida has amazing long-term care benefits that will actually help contribute or pay for the cost of care. But in order for us to apply for those benefits, the power of attorney must be updated to include that language.
So is it true, though, that let's say I live in Connecticut and then I move to Florida and I don't see you, I'm not smart enough to come see you, which I would, and then I pass away, is my will in Connecticut good, or am I going to pass away without a will under the law?
Okay, so the good thing about Florida is Florida rewards pre-planning. Florida wants to attract wealth, and I'll give you an example of that in a moment. But on the other side of that, Florida is always looking for a way to tax a mistake. So the power of attorney, not to go back to that, but the power of attorney for all 5 parts of the power of attorney is right around $100. But if someone becomes disabled in Florida and they don't have a good power of attorney, the state of Florida is going to force what's called a guardianship action, or court-appointed representative, but that comes at an average cost of about $3,500.
Okay.
So you ask the question, who are the most likely to be the person not to have a good power of attorney? It's people who usually can't afford a couple $1,000s, but that's what happens.
Okay.
Same thing with a will. If someone does nothing, the fees can be easily over 5 to 6%. If someone has a last will and testament and they do nothing further, the fees again can be 5 to 6%. Where if they simply designate beneficiaries or they use a trust in Florida, the fees are non-existent and creditors get nothing.
Right.
But it requires doing some additional planning to make sure we've avoided fees, delay, and creditors.
So it's fair to say, at the simplest sense, that if you move and you become a resident of a new state, you should have an elder care attorney or an attorney from that state review the documents to make sure that they are up to date now that you're living in a new state, in our example, Florida.
That's correct.
Right.
And what I'm going to recommend, if I can make the recommendation, you don't just want to go to an attorney that does wills and power of attorney. You want to go to a true and estate planning firm, because what they're going to look at is, how do we avoid all fees for your family? How do we avoid the delay? How do we avoid creditors? How do we get you set up where you would qualify for benefits in the event someone's becoming disabled? And that's the difference between an estate planning firm, a law firm, and just someone who prepares a will or trust.
Right, so going back, and this is just very basic stuff, what's the difference between someone saying, I need to have a will, and someone saying, I need to have an estate plan? Is there a difference in the marketplace, like in consumers' mind? If someone says, I got a will, is that the same as an estate plan? Or if somebody says, I did an estate plan, is that just a will, or is it something more than that?
It's so much different. So if you contact any attorney, they won't most likely say that they'll prepare a will for you. But a will is not estate planning.
Okay.
So here's the great thing about Florida. Florida does not have a beneficiary inheritance tax. So it doesn't matter where any of the beneficiaries reside, they will not pay an inheritance tax. But in lieu of that, Florida has a transfer fee, what they call probate fee. It's a fee that can go from 5 to 6%. There's a delay of up to 9 to 12 months, and all end-of-life creditors get paid before the family. So when you go to an attorney and just say, I want a will, and they give you a will, you've not done estate planning, because we have not avoid the fees, delay, and creditors. A true estate planning attorney is going to make sure we've avoided all fees, all delay, and creditors as much as possible. So that's a big difference between doing a will and doing an estate plan. And if I could use one example, Florida's homestead rule says if the house is going solely to children through a will, it does not go through what's called a full administration, the 9 to 12 month process.
Okay.
Rather, it only goes through what's called a summary administration, which only takes 4 to 6 weeks. But here's the interesting thing. If someone goes online or they go to an attorney that doesn't understand the homestead rules, if their will lists a charity, church, or friend, they lose the homestead exemption. So now one of the larger assets that was protected from creditors is now subjected to creditors solely because someone did not go to an estate plan.
So that would be an example of a common mistake you see practicing.
That's correct. And you see that with LegalZoom or someone who goes online to prepare a will on their own.
Okay, so let's talk about, and I know this isn't your target market, but if you're a millennial, you're in your 20s, 30s, starting out in life, starting out in your career, do you need an estate plan, or is a will acceptable?
So if I can break it in. So we have the documents for the client, which are what are called the incapacity documents, power of attorney for financial, medical, what's called pre-need, the HIP authorization, which is a release of medical privacy law and a living will.
Okay.
Those things are for the client. Anyone over the age of 18 should have one. Very easy and inexpensive. Now, when we get to estate planning, and we're talking about a millennial, someone who's just getting started in their career, the time they need to do estate planning is when they have minor children.
Right.
Because, use an example, and you see this all the time, if someone has an IRA, 401k, 403b, 457, and they name their spouse first and children second, and both of them pass away, the question is, who's going to be in control of those funds? It may not be the person that they want. Also,
right.
Do they want the child to receive their share at age 18, and do they want those funds to affect their child's eligibility for scholarships, student loans, or financial aid? So the time that someone really needs to do estate planning is when they have minor children.
Okay. So you just gave, I think, an example of my next question, which is, what are the basic must-haves for everyone? And so the basics are, correct me if I'm wrong, a will and those other health-related documents, or you said incapacity-related documents?
Right. So first, we always protect the client first, the client's family second. So the incapacity documents are, again, 5 things: the financial power of attorney, the medical power of attorney, parental guardianship provisions in case the court gets involved, the HIPAA authorization, which is the release of medical privacy law, and living will. Those 5 things will protect the client and their spouse in every situation during the time they're alive but disabled.
Okay.
Following their passing, then we're going to look at the transfer of assets between the family. Now, everyone relies on a will, but it's usually the documents there only as a backup.
Right.
If we've done everything properly in our estate planning, the will not be utilized.
Okay, good. And so those documents you mentioned, they're specific to the state of Florida, but is it fair to say in most other states, and you're probably not a member in the bar in all the states in the United States, but that would hold true for listeners that are in other states. You're going to need those types of documents. The names may change. Mm-hmm. The language internal to the document may change, but those are pretty basic and universal in all the states?
That's correct.
All right, great.
But if I could point out one thing, and this is, you'll see off this in Connecticut and the New England states, a lot of people prepare a will thinking the will covers every asset they own. But what people have to keep in mind is the will does not cover any asset with the designated beneficiary.
That's right.
So
good.
You'll see these guardianship provisions or provisions saying the child's share will be held for their until a certain age. But in reality, anything with a beneficiary designation, a retirement account, insurance policy, or even an annuity, those are going to go to the child at age 18 if the child's named as a beneficiary.
Right, which actually, you're always one step ahead of me.
That's right.
Right? No, that's all good. Is because we see all the time as we're working with clients, we're dealing with lots of accounts that have beneficiaries, as you said, traditional IRAs, Roth IRAs, 401ks, annuities, life insurance, and the list goes on. And we are very focused on making sure that we have accurate, up-to-date beneficiaries, including contingent beneficiaries, because it's really important. And that's our view. Can you just speak to the importance of having beneficiary designations on those types of accounts and to have a record, a written record of that designation with you and or other professionals you may be working with?
So think of it this way. A will is instruction to the court. If the court gets involved, there's fees of 5 to 6%, up to 5 to 6%, a delay of 9 to 12 months, and all creditors get paid before the children and the family. So the way you would avoid probate is one of 2 different options. First option is by designated beneficiary, like you said, and I'll go into that more specific. The second option is using a trust. Now, if someone has a very basic situation where it's a traditional marriage, first marriage, and their children are healthy or no liability or disability issues, they can name their spouse first and the children second. And by doing that, you would avoid all fees, delaying creditors, because the will would not be involved to distribute that asset. But there are several situations where beneficiary designation will not be sufficient. First, if someone's in a blended family. If they designate their spouse in a blended family on an IRA, insurance policy, annuity, they've in essence disinherited their children if they pass away before their spouse.
Right.
Second, if a child's going through a lawsuit, divorce, bankruptcy, foreclosure, and they have medical bills, upon their passing, that money could be subjected to the child's creditors. Next, if the child's disabled or the child's receiving state or federal assistance, by naming the child as a direct beneficiary, you could make the child could end up losing the eligibility for that program. So there's several situations where a beneficiary designation is good for avoiding probate, but it doesn't really meet the needs of the family, and that's when we have to consider something like a trust.
Right, and that's part of the consultation that individuals and families should have with their elder care attorney, is everything we talked about, but also accounts that wouldn't go through the will, these beneficiary accounts, to make sure that there's a thinking through of the process of who should be named beneficiary, primary beneficiary, contingent beneficiary, and that's part of the plan, right?
Absolutely.
How often do you see people that come in to your office for a consultation that either don't have beneficiaries or have different beneficiaries on the accounts, and it's just kind of either not done or done haphazardly?
It's very common, and that's why we recommend we talk every 3 to 5 years with our clients to review the documents they have in place for them and their family. But, no one wants to deal with their own mortality. And sitting across the table with an estate attorney or elder law attorney kind of brings to the forefront their mortality.
Yes.
And so it makes them address uncomfortable situations. Also, you may not get along with your children. You may not want your children to be part of your finances. And so I understand a lot of these issues are uncomfortable.